At my husband's funeral, the air smelled of lilies and cold rain, a day meant for final goodbyes. The priest's voice trembled softly as he spoke about love, faith, and eternal rest. I tried to listen, but my heartbeat was louder than his words. My husband was gone, and with him, the last man who ever truly saw me. I stood beside the coffin, holding a handkerchief soaked with tears, when my son leaned in close enough for only me to hear. His breath brushed against my ear as he whispered, "Finally, the money's ours." For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. The words didn't make sense, how could they? Then I saw his face. No grief. No pain. Just the faintest smirk, the kind you try to hide but can't. My knees weakened, and I gripped the pew for balance. I wanted to scream, but the weight of that moment crushed every sound inside me. My husband's body hadn't even been buried yet, and my son, our son, was already dividing his inheritance. I felt my heart shatter in slow motion, not because of death, but because of betrayal that came wrapped in my child's voice. I had spent my whole life giving everything to that boy. When his father and I had nothing but dreams and overdue bills, I'd taken extra shifts at the diner just so he could have clean shoes and lunch money. When he failed his first semester in college, I lied to his father and said the fees were my fault so he wouldn't feel ashamed. When he married a woman who looked at me like a burden, I bit my tongue and smiled through every insult. And when his father's heart started to give out, I drained my savings to make sure our son wouldn't lose a father before the doctors had tried everything. So when he whispered those 5 poison words, it wasn't just betrayal, it was revelation. I realized something terrifying. My husband's death wasn't the moment my world ended. It was the moment my son showed me who he truly was. The man I'd raised wasn't grieving his father. He was celebrating his own inheritance. But here's what he didn't know, something I never told him, something hidden beneath the paperwork he thought he understood. My husband didn't trust him either. A month before he died, my husband had rewritten the will in secret. He had looked at me with those tired, wise eyes and said, "Promise me, Renata, if anything happens, don't hand over a single penny until you're sure our son remembers who he was raised to be." I promised him. I sealed that promise like a vow carved into my bones. So when my son whispered, "Finally, the money's ours," I whispered back, though only in my heart, "Not yet, my boy. You'll have to earn it." People at the funeral saw only a grieving widow. They didn't see the storm behind my eyes. They didn't hear the quiet vow I made beside the coffin, that I would protect my husband's legacy not with grief, but with strength. My husband had spent 40 years building our life from nothing. I would not let greed bury him twice. After the service, I stood by the open grave and watched the first handful of dirt fall onto his coffin. My son stood across from me, holding his wife's hand, looking impatient, almost relieved. She leaned into him, whispering something, and they both smiled. Smiled. At a funeral. The same woman who had once called me the charity case mother-in-law. The same woman who had refused to bring her children to visit unless I sent them gas money. They thought I was powerless now, that I'd crumble without my husband to shield me. They forgot I'd been surviving long before they were ever comfortable. On the drive home, I replayed that whisper in my head, "Finally, the money's ours." Each word felt like a cut, but it also lit a fire. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought I was too broken to see what they were planning. They didn't know that behind my grief, I was already calculating. The bank accounts. The trust. The documents in the locked drawer my husband had told me never to open until he was gone. I was no fool. My husband had taught me everything about patience, and now it was time to use it. At home, I sat in the quiet living room that still smelled like his cologne and stared at the framed photograph of our family. My husband stood tall and proud, our son grinning between us. I remembered the day that picture was taken. My husband had said, "One day, he'll thank us for everything." Now I wondered if that day would ever come. Grief has strange ways of teaching you about people. It shows you who comforts you, who vanishes, and who waits for the first chance to profit from your pain. I had been a mother, a provider, a protector. But that night, I decided I would become something else entirely, a woman no one could deceive again. My son thought he had already won, but he had only started a war he wasn't ready for. He saw my tears and thought they were surrender. What he didn't see was the calm beneath them, the same calm my husband used to have before making his biggest decisions. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning justice. And that justice would come quietly, like the rain that night, soft at first, but unstoppable once it began. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved more than life itself, you'll understand what I felt standing by that coffin. The pain, yes, but also the clarity. The moment you finally see the truth you've been too afraid to face. Tell me in the comments, have you ever realized too late that someone you loved was only standing beside you for what they could gain? I read every story you share, and I promise, someone out there needs to hear yours. Because this isn't just a story about death. It's a story about what comes after, when the tears dry, the mask falls, and a mother decides that enough is enough. 3 days after the funeral, the house still smelled like flowers that had started to die. Their sweetness had turned sour, just like every sympathy card stacked neatly on the table, unopened. I sat at the kitchen counter where my husband and I used to share breakfast. His chair was still pulled slightly back, as if he'd return any minute. But what came instead was a knock at the door. It was my son, Daniel, with his wife standing beside him, her smile polite, but her eyes sharp. They brought no flowers, no warmth, no quiet grief. They brought documents. "Mom," Daniel started softly, his voice dipped in forced sorrow. "Dad would have wanted me to help you sort through the finances." He placed a brown envelope on the table. "We just want to make things easier for you. Easier for me." The same boy who couldn't even look at me at the funeral was suddenly concerned about convenience. I didn't touch the envelope. I only asked, "Why the rush, Daniel?" He exchanged a glance with his wife, who spoke before he could. "We just think it's better to transfer things quickly before taxes make it complicated." Her tone was smooth, too smooth. My husband used to say, when people talk about helping with money, they're really talking about helping themselves. I could almost hear him whispering it from his photo on the wall. I opened the envelope and saw what I expected, a set of pre-filled transfer forms, authorization slips, and one blank line with my signature space already marked in yellow. I slid the papers back across the table. "Not today," I said. "I haven't even read your father's will yet." The silence that followed could have frozen the room. Daniel's face twitched, something between irritation and disbelief. "Mom," he said with a sigh, "you know I'm the one who understands these things. You don't need to get stressed. I can handle it for you." It was the same tone he'd used as a teenager whenever he wanted something he didn't deserve. The difference now was that he wasn't asking for an allowance, he was asking for control. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. His wife tried to smile again, but her patience slipped. "Renata," she said, "you've been through a lot. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." She reached out as if to take my hand, but I pulled it back. "Harder?" I asked, meeting her eyes. My husband died 3 days ago, and you're sitting in his chair asking me to sign away his life's work. Tell me, which part of this do you think is easy? They left not long after, whispering on the porch before driving away. I sat there alone, staring at that empty chair again. For the first time in 40 years, I felt something new rising inside me, something my grief couldn't drown. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. That night, I pulled out the lockbox from under the bed, the one my husband had told me to open only after he was gone. Inside were 2 envelopes. One was labeled for you, the other for him. My hands trembled as I opened the first. Inside was a handwritten letter in his familiar blue ink. My dearest Renata. If you're reading this, I'm no longer there to protect you from the people who might mistake your kindness for weakness. I've left everything in your name for a reason. Our son needs to learn what it means to stand on his own. Don't let anyone rush you. Grieve in your own time. Decide in your own time. And remember, peace is worth more than money. All my love, always. Robert. The letter smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. I pressed it against my heart and cried, not just for him, but for the truth he already knew. He'd seen the same thing I'd seen at the funeral, only earlier. By the next morning, I'd made up my mind. I went to the bank and asked to speak to the branch manager. I'd like to secure all my accounts under private authorization only, I told him. No one, not even family, should have access without my consent. He looked at me with concern. Of course, Mrs. Richter. May I ask, has someone been pressuring you? I smiled politely. Let's just say I'm learning who really grieves when love dies, and who grieves only when the money stops. I signed the paperwork and walked out of that bank lighter than I had felt in years. Outside, the wind carried the last of the funeral rain away, and for a moment, I felt my husband beside me again. You're doing fine, he seemed to say. That evening, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His tone was soft again, rehearsed. Mom, listen. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. I just want what's best for you. What's best for me, I said, is time. He paused. Time for what? To remember who I can trust. There was a long silence. Then, his wife's voice cut through the receiver. If you make this difficult, Renata, we'll have to involve legal counsel. There's inheritance law for a reason. I smiled faintly. Then let the law decide, I said, and hung up. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. I realized how much of my life I had spent living in service of others, my husband, my son, their happiness, their comfort. I had been everyone's stability but my own. Grief had stripped me bare, but beneath it, there was something still beating, an old strength that hadn't died yet. I remembered my husband once saying, people reveal who they are in the quiet moments after loss. He was right. I had lost him, but I had also found the truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is its own kind of freedom. The next morning, I began making lists. Not lists of bills or chores, but of boundaries. No more unannounced visits. No shared bank cards. No more pretending love and manipulation could live in the same room. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about putting myself first. I felt clean. Daniel called again that afternoon. Mom, he said sharply, why is the bank saying my access was revoked? Because it was, I said. That's not fair. It wasn't fair that your father died while you were waiting for his money. The line went dead. As I put down the phone, I realized something important. Grief can break you, but it can also rebuild you, piece by piece, truth by truth. And mine was rebuilding itself into someone stronger than before. I looked up at my husband's photograph one last time before turning off the lights. "You were right, Robert," I whispered. "Peace is worth more than money. And I'm going to make sure I keep both." The world outside was still, but inside, something had shifted forever. The woman they thought they could manipulate was gone. In her place stood someone they never expected to face. Someone ready for the war they'd just begun. By the fourth day, the storm inside me had turned into silence. A silence that doesn't scream but watches, calculates, and remembers. I had spent 3 nights replaying the moment my son whispered those words at his father's funeral. "Finally, the money's ours." And every time I heard them, I saw his father's face, his tired smile, his trembling hand gripping mine before he passed. "Promise me," he had said, "don't let greed take what love built." I didn't know then that he was warning me about our own son. The next morning, Daniel arrived again, but this time he didn't come alone. His wife, Clara, trailed behind him like a shadow, clutching a leather bag filled with papers. I had just made coffee when they entered uninvited. "We need to talk," he said sharply, as if this was his house now. "About what?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "About the inheritance," Clara replied. "You can't just freeze everything. There are bills, taxes, and Dad would have wanted." I cut her off. "Don't you dare speak about what your father-in-law would have wanted." She blinked, but didn't stop. "He left everything in your name. But let's be realistic, you're not getting any younger, and we're the ones with responsibilities. Kids. A mortgage. It's time we start managing things properly." I looked at her, this woman who had never worked a day without complaining, who treated generosity like an obligation owed to her. "Properly," I repeated. "So that means giving everything I have to you?" Daniel sighed as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. "Mom, it's not about giving. It's about what's fair." Fair. That word hit like a slap. Where was fairness when I worked double shifts to pay for his tuition? Where was fairness when I sacrificed vacations, clothes, and rest so he could live comfortably? Fairness died the day he decided my worth ended with my wallet. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and they left with forced smiles. As soon as the door shut, I locked it behind them and pulled out the second envelope from my husband's box, the one labeled for him. I had never opened it, thinking it was meant for Daniel, but now I wasn't so sure. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, typed, dated, and notarized. My husband had left everything not just to me, but in trust, with explicit instructions that no distribution could occur until I deemed fit. If I passed, the funds would go to charity, not to Daniel. My husband had seen this coming. He knew our son's heart long before I did. The next day, I went to see Mr. Klein, our longtime banker. He was an older man who had known our family for decades. When he saw me, his expression softened. "Mrs. Richter, I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. "I need your help securing everything. My son and his wife are eager." He nodded knowingly. "You're not the first mother to face this, sadly." He helped me move my accounts into a private senior trust, fully protected, requiring dual authentication. "This way," he said, "no one can touch a single cent without you present." As I signed the documents, I felt something uncoil inside me. Power. Not the cruel kind, just the quiet strength that comes when you finally stop being afraid. That evening, Daniel called again. "Mom, what's going on?" "The bank says the accounts are restricted." "Yes," I said simply. "You can't do that." "I just did." "You're being manipulated," he snapped. "That lawyer or banker is filling your head with paranoia." "Dad would." "Your father trusted me," I interrupted. "He knew I could handle this." For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then he muttered, "You'll regret this," and hung up. For the first time, I didn't cry after his threats. I smiled. Regret was for people who didn't know the truth. I knew mine now. The next few days were oddly peaceful. I went for walks in the park, something I hadn't done in years. I talked to my neighbors, joined them for coffee. I even found myself laughing, a small, fragile laugh that reminded me I was still alive beneath the grief. But peace never lasts long when money is involved. On the 7th day after the funeral, I came home to find my front door unlocked. My heart raced. Inside, Daniel and Clara were sitting in my living room like they owned it. A man in a gray suit stood beside them with a briefcase. "Mom," Daniel said, pretending calm, "this is Mr. Fisher, a family attorney. We just want to clarify a few things." Mr. Fisher smiled politely. "Mrs. Richter, your children are concerned about your mental state. They believe recent decisions may not be entirely rational. We're here to ensure your well-being." I stared at them all, realizing the depth of their audacity. "You broke into my home," I said quietly. Daniel stood. "You left the door unlocked." "No," I said. "You had a key. A key I trusted you with." Mr. Fisher continued, "If you'd sign a power of attorney, your son can manage your affairs while you rest." I almost laughed. "Rest," I said. "You mean disappear quietly while you empty my accounts?" Clara's mask cracked. "You can't talk to us like this. Everything you have will be ours one day anyway." That sentence froze time. It wasn't a slip, it was a confession. They weren't waiting for inheritance, they were waiting for my absence. I walked to the door and pointed. "Out." "Mom," Daniel started, "you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You came into my house with a lawyer, called me incompetent, and planned to take everything before your father's body was cold." My voice didn't shake this time. It rose like something ancient and firm. "You think grief makes me weak? It's made me dangerous." They hesitated, but the look in my eyes must have told them I meant it. Mr. Fisher gathered his papers awkwardly. Clara muttered under her breath. Daniel glared one last time before slamming the door on their way out. When the silence returned, it was almost holy. I walked through every room and collected the old photographs, family portraits, holidays, birthdays, and put them in a box. Not out of hatred, but closure. Sometimes, love has to be buried too. That night, I called Mr. Klein and told him everything. He gave me a number for a lawyer named Mr. Weber who specialized in elder financial abuse. "You're not alone," he said. And for the first time, I believed him. As I lay in bed, I realized the storm wasn't just mine anymore. It had a name, a direction, and a purpose. I was done being a victim. They had started a war for money, but I was about to finish it with something far more powerful, truth. And somewhere, I could almost hear my husband's voice, low and proud. "You kept your promise, Renata." Morning light spilled through the curtains, but my house didn't feel like home anymore. Every corner seemed to carry an echo, his voice, his laugh, the quiet way he used to say my name. Yet beneath that grief, something else had begun to grow. Strength. Cold, deliberate, almost surgical strength. Because when the people you raise turn into your enemies, love stops being soft. It becomes strategy. 2 days after Daniel's attempted intervention, a white envelope arrived at my door. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar. Inside was a formal notice, a petition for guardianship review. My own son had filed paperwork suggesting I was unfit to manage financial affairs due to emotional instability following bereavement. It felt like a knife disguised as concern. I sat there for a long moment, letter trembling in my hands, then folded it neatly and placed it beside my husband's picture. "You were right, Robert," I whispered. "Greed doesn't grieve." That afternoon, I met with Mr. Weber, the lawyer Mr. Klein had recommended. He listened quietly as I explained everything, every whisper, every document, every threat. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Mrs. Richter, I've seen this before. They're counting on fear. The moment you act afraid, they win." He slid a folder toward me. "You still have all the power. Let's use it." For the first time, someone wasn't pitying me, they were standing beside me. We filed a counter-petition within 24 hours. I signed every page without hesitation. When I walked out of his office, the sun hit my face, and I realized something strange. I wasn't scared anymore. That evening, Daniel called again, pretending nothing had happened. "Mom, can we talk?" "I think we've talked enough," I said. He sighed heavily. "Look, this is getting out of hand. You're listening to people who don't know our family." "Our family," I repeated. "You mean the one that breaks into my home and calls me insane?" "Mom, it's not like that." "It's exactly like that." There was a long pause. Then his voice dropped. "If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it." I didn't raise my voice. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is how long it took me to see who you really are." After I hung up, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my husband's will again, reading every line. The trust was airtight. Even if Daniel tried to challenge it, the clause would transfer everything to a charitable foundation the moment coercion was proven. My husband had built a fortress around me, and now I was learning to defend it. The following week, Daniel's lawyer sent another letter demanding an evaluation. Mr. Weber smiled when he read it. "Perfect," he said. "We'll invite a state-appointed psychiatrist. It'll prove your competence and disprove theirs." I nodded. The more they pushed, the deeper they'd bury themselves. When the appointed day came, I welcomed the evaluator into my home. She asked questions about memory, finances, daily habits. I answered everyone clearly, calmly. Before leaving, she smiled softly. "Mrs. Richter, I hope my mother is half as sharp as you when she's your age." That night, I slept soundly for the first time since the funeral. But peace never lasts when guilt begins to crumble pride. The next evening, Daniel showed up unannounced again. He stood on the porch, rain soaking his hair, desperation in his eyes. "Mom, please," he said. "We can fix this. I'll drop the petition if you just transfer half. I'm in debt. Clara, she pushed me into this, okay? I just need time." I looked at him, the boy I once held through fevers and heartbreaks. The boy who used to call me his hero. Time? I said quietly. You had 30 years of it. You spent it taking. He clenched his fists. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You wanted your father's legacy without his integrity. He looked like he wanted to speak again, but shame silenced him. I closed the door slowly, not slamming it, just ending something that should have ended long ago. The next morning, Mr. Weber called with news. The evaluation came back flawless. The judge dismissed their petition. Your son's lawyer withdrew before the hearing. I thanked him quietly. It's over then, I said. Legally, yes, he replied. Morally, that's up to you. That night, I sat by the window watching the rain. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about legacy, the kind of legacy my husband meant when he said peace was worth more than money. I realized I'd been mourning the wrong thing. My husband hadn't left me alone, he'd left me prepared. The phone rang again around midnight. It was Daniel. His voice was broken this time, stripped of arrogance. Mom. Clara left me. The debts are worse than I said. I can't pay the mortgage. His voice cracked. I don't know what to do. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and endless. Then I said, you'll do what your father always did, stand up and work for it. The money's not yours, Daniel. But the lesson still can be. He didn't reply, only sobbed softly before the line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone, feeling neither joy nor vengeance, just peace. Later that night, I went to my husband's photo again. You were right, I whispered. He had to lose everything to remember what love costs. As dawn broke, light poured into the room, soft and golden. I made myself a cup of coffee and opened the window. The air smelled clean, like rain and beginnings. I realized something simple yet powerful: grief doesn't end, it transforms. It turns weakness into wisdom, silence into resolve. And as I watched the sky shift from gray to gold, I thought of the words my son had whispered at the funeral, finally, the money's ours. He was wrong then. He's wrong now. Because the money was never the inheritance. The lesson was. 3 weeks passed before I saw my son again. The first 2, he called every day, sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, always desperate. I didn't pick up. The silence was my answer. When you've spent your whole life being guilted into saying yes, the first no feels like freedom disguised as guilt. But by the 3rd week, the calls stopped. And that's when I knew something bigger was coming. The storm hit on a Thursday morning. I was sipping tea by the window when a black car pulled into my driveway. 2 men stepped out, one in a navy suit holding a folder, the other wearing that polite, sharp smile that never reaches the eyes. Behind them, Daniel climbed out slowly. He looked thinner, exhausted, but his expression still carried that same wounded pride. He rang the bell twice before I opened the door. Mom, we need to talk, he said. Again? I answered calmly. Talking seems to be your favorite way to threaten me lately. He flinched. Please. Just hear me out. The man in the navy suit introduced himself as Mr. Langford, a legal representative. Mrs. Richter, your son has authorized me to deliver a financial mediation proposal, he said, handing me the folder. I didn't take it. If it's another way of taking what isn't his, I don't need to read it. Daniel's voice broke. Mom, I'm drowning. Clara's gone, the debts are piling up. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to be like this? I stared at him, unmoved. You wanted control. You got it. This is what control looks like when you lose your soul trying to get it. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps, Mrs. Richter, if we could. I cut him off. You can leave. This is between a mother and the son who buried her trust next to his father's coffin. He left quickly, probably realizing this wasn't a negotiation, it was a reckoning. When the door closed, Daniel's facade collapsed. He sank into the nearest chair, hands trembling. I messed up, Mom, he said quietly. I thought I could handle everything. I thought the money would fix things. But the moment I lost you, everything fell apart. For the first time, he sounded like the boy I used to know, the one who brought me wildflowers after every school play, the one who called me his best friend. But I had learned by now that regret and remorse weren't the same thing. Regret comes when consequences arrive. Remorse comes when the soul changes. Do you even know what your father did before he died? I asked. He shook his head slowly. I went to the cabinet and pulled out the second copy of the will, the one he'd never seen. Your father left everything to me not because he wanted to punish you, but because he didn't trust what greed might do to you. He looked up, shame flickering across his face. I know, he whispered. He told me before he passed. He said, if you ever lose your mother, you'll lose everything that made you a man. I froze. He said that to you? Daniel nodded. And I didn't understand what he meant until now. The quiet filled the room like fog. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat across from him, studying his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion, the kind that comes from realizing you were your own enemy all along. Mom, he said finally, please. Just help me get back on my feet. I'll pay you back. I swear it. I shook my head. No. You'll earn it back, through work, not through pity. He looked desperate. I don't even have a place to stay. There's a guest room in the back, I said softly. But you come in with nothing. No accounts, no promises, no lies. You want to start over? Then start as my son again, not as my debt collector. He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. Thank you, Mom. That night, he stayed. I heard him pacing the hallway, probably wrestling with shame that words couldn't express. I sat in my bedroom, the letter from my husband in my lap, reading it again under the warm light of the lamp. At the end of the page, I noticed something I'd missed before, a postscript written faintly in pencil. If he ever loses himself, let him earn back your trust the way I earned yours, through time, not apology. Tears blurred the words, but they didn't fall from pain this time, they came from understanding. My husband had seen our entire future before it happened. And now, I was living it line by line. The next morning, Daniel woke up early and made coffee for the first time in his life. He handed me a cup silently, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. But I knew healing doesn't happen in a day. It happens through humility, through quiet mornings like this when guilt turns into action. Later that afternoon, I went to visit my husband's grave. The cemetery was peaceful, birds singing faintly, wind moving through the trees. I knelt and placed fresh flowers by the headstone. He came back, I whispered. Broke, lost, but maybe not beyond saving. I smiled faintly. You always said love doesn't mean weakness. You were right. It means boundaries. and I finally learned how to build them. As I stood to leave, I noticed Daniel watching from a distance, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. He didn't interrupt. He just waited until I was done. That small act of the patience, the respect, was more apology than any word could offer. That night, as we sat quietly over dinner, he finally said, "I'll get a job. Any job. I want to fix this." I nodded. "Then start tomorrow." He did. For the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, but still found the strength to forgive without forgetting, comment a respect below. Because forgiveness doesn't mean surrender. It means choosing peace over poison. The following Sunday morning felt strangely calm. The air smelled of wet grass after a long night's rain, and sunlight crept through the windows like an apology. I woke earlier than usual, made breakfast for two, and waited for Daniel to emerge from the guest room. He looked tired but lighter, as though something heavy had been left behind in his sleep. He sat at the table quietly, eyes on the plate rather than on me. I didn't rush the silence between us, it was the only language we still shared. When he finally spoke, it wasn't about money. "Mom," he said softly, "I applied for a job at the hardware store downtown. They're hiring part-time. I know it's not much, but it's a start." I nodded. "Good. You need to start somewhere honest." He smiled faintly, almost shyly. "I think Dad would have liked that place. Lots of tools, old men talking about fixing things they'll never finish." For the first time in months, I laughed at a small, genuine sound that felt like air returning to my lungs. "Yes," I said, "he would have fit right in." The rest of the morning passed quietly. But peace, I've learned, is fragile. It can crumble with one phone call. And that's exactly what happened at noon. The bank called. "Mrs. Richter," the manager's voice said, careful and measured. "We've had a suspicious inquiry. Someone tried to access your account again this morning." My pulse quickened. "Who?" "An online attempt under your son's name. But don't worry, it was denied." I closed my eyes, disappointment stinging more than surprise. After everything, after the tears, the apology, the coffee, the promise, he still tried. When he came home that evening, I didn't shout. I simply asked, "Did you go near the bank today?" He froze. His lips parted, searching for a lie that would fit. I just wanted to see if the freeze was lifted, if maybe you'd forgiven you? I finished for him. "Forgiveness doesn't come with passwords, Daniel." He lowered his head. "I wasn't trying to steal. I thought maybe." "You thought maybe if you could get to the money first, you'd never have to face what you did," I said quietly. "But you can't escape consequences, son. They follow you like shadows." He said nothing. Just walked out to the porch, sitting in the rain until the sky turned gray. I watched from the window, the ache in my chest no longer grief but resignation. That night, I packed an envelope, his father's letter, a few $100s in cash, and a note that said, "Go build something. Anything. But build it yourself this time." I left it on his bedside table and went to sleep before he came in. When I woke up the next morning, he was gone. The bed neatly made, the envelope missing, the house quiet again. I stood there in the doorway for a long time, staring at the space he left behind. It didn't feel like abandonment anymore. It felt like closure. The days that followed were calm, peaceful even. I went back to gardening, joined a small reading group at the library, and met other women who carried their own stories of betrayal and survival. It's strange how grief introduces you to strangers who somehow understand you better than family. A month later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mom, I took your advice. I found work at a construction site in another town. It's hard, but it's honest. I don't expect forgiveness yet, but I want you to know I finally understand what Dad meant. I had to lose everything to see how much you gave. I'm trying to become the kind of man who deserves to be your son again. Daniel. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I read it, not from pain but from release. Maybe, just maybe, some lessons bloom only in the ruins of pride. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the stars like I used to with my husband. I whispered into the night, he's learning, Robert. The hard way, but he's learning. And I felt, in the stillness, something shift inside me. Not the fire of revenge anymore, but the warmth of acceptance. The story that began in a whisper at a funeral was ending in another whisper, one of peace. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or victory speeches. It comes quietly, when you finally stop needing others to understand your worth. I leaned back, eyes on the sky, and smiled. Finally, I murmured, the peace is mine. If this story touched you, share it with someone who's had to choose strength over comfort. And remember, sometimes the richest people are the ones who learn how to let go.